Hello and welcome back to Imagination Mansion, and welcome to 2023 on the channel. I hope everyone had a good New Year's and a good holiday period, and mine were just a lot quieter than usual. My family was all dispersed this year instead of all being in one place, which some would say was a good thing because it's quite a lot of people that it ends up being. But and also I was in work for most of that period, honestly. But it was still a good time. It was still a good Christmas time and a good New Year. So on with the video. So during 2022, I started to write down all of the books that I was reading. I didn't do this at the start of 2022, which is a shame, but it was just in this one, which is kind of just peeling everywhere. I'm not quite sure why. To be fair, it was in like the discount box at the shop. But yeah, it's just a little moleskin dotted notebook. And I started, so I made a little book log of all the books I was reading. And I just ticked them off when I was reading and then when I'd read them. And then later on in the book, I would then do like a bit of a book review. So I'd say what the title was, what the author was, what I rate it, how many pages there were, the date that I finished it, and like the review. So I did that for every single book that I read from, when was this one? So the first one was, the 8th month, which was August. So this is from August, so it's not the whole year, it's not even half a year, it's like the last like quarter. But I thought it'd still be interesting to go through what I read, just to see the range, honestly, of things that I read. And I thought it'd be fun to go with them in a video. So first up, we have Life Between the Tides by Adam Nicholson. This was basically about rock pools, specifically in one specific place. Can't remember specifically where, because it has been a while. But I think it was somewhere in the UK. But yeah, so it was basically studying all the life that sort of like exists in and around rock pools. And it was very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And it was quite poetic at times, which was definitely interesting. Like, it's always interesting to see different people's take on what could be a very boring topic, because obviously some books will be very dry, which obviously some people like just cold hard facts because that's what they're there for. But then some people use poetry, some people use comedy, hilariously, ironically. And so I really liked his writing style, and I really liked the way he described all these little things. And yeah, I just really liked that one. I'm gonna try not to ramble too much because I do have quite a few here. But yeah, good book, poetic, about all the little critters that live on our shores. So next up, we have The Planets by Andrew Cohen and Professor Brian Cox. I have quite a few of their books. Space is one of my interests. The Planets is a very, very good book. I'm not sure which came first, the program or the book, but I haven't watched the program. So I was going into this blind, and I also love how they have very cool pictures in the middle. But it was so interesting to see like the effects of each planet on each other and how they were like, because that's the thing, they don't exist just by themselves. Obviously they they sort of like tug and pull at each other, and certain things being in certain places means other planets act a certain way, and it was all just very interesting, and I very much enjoyed it. So next up we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. There we go. It's a classic. It's a classic sci-fi dystopia about basically how it's like fabricating a utopia almost, and how everything's just a bit too perfect and a bit too clinical and scientific. But it's very, very interesting, and it is quite chilling at points as well, when you realize just like how fabricated this place, like this society is. And next up is a reread for me. To be fair, Brave New World was a reread as well, which is Saoirse or Circe, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, by Madeline Miller. So I haven't read like the original like myth texts that Circe appeared in. So I don't know if it's accurate to the myths at all, but whether it is or it isn't, it's just a very good story. Like, it's got very strong characters, it's very moving, and it's just a very strong... I hate saying strong female character because that almost feels like a different type of archetype, but Saoirse is a woman that should not be messed with, and she will do what she has to get what she needs, and I love that. So next up we have this behemoth, which is The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene. So this one was interesting because it's a topic that I'm very, very interested in. So it's string theory, which is related to like the multiverse theory. So it's an area of like quantum, basically trying to pull quantum physics and general relativity together, I think, if that's what I've got right. So basically it's, yeah, they're trying to pull the big and the little together to make it make sense. And it is a very, very interesting topic. But the problem is that he uses analogies and sort of like that kind of technique, you know, storytelling kind of techniques to try and explain everything. I don't understand analogies. They go completely over my head. I'd rather just have the facts straight up. I mean, I think it works for quite a lot of people because it did win like science awards and all that kind of stuff, and quite a lot of the reviews said it was quite easy to understand, but I struggle to conceptualize things as other things. So for me, I spent most of the time confused as to why we were talking about jetpacks when we were supposed to be talking about particles. So I tried, but I was just as confused by the end as I was at the beginning. So I am sorry, Mr. Greene. So next up we have The Hobbit. So I am 26 years old, and this was the first time, the 27th of September, that I read this book for the very first time, and I loved it. I didn't have this version. I got a version from the charity shop, but that instantly started falling apart because it was probably quite an old edition. So I did get a new one because I absolutely will want to reread it. And yeah, it was... because I'd only ever watched the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, I do now have the Lord of the Rings books, which I will read probably sometime this year. But I'd never read the book, and I've talked about this in a different video because I was like, oh, it's such a popular book that if I don't like this, people are going to hate me. But thankfully, wasn't an issue because I absolutely loved it. It was just so atmospheric and so cozy. Like, even though bad things were happening, I wasn't stressed reading it, and I take that as a win, and I loved it. So absolutely going to be rereading this one for sure. Next up is one of my classics, which is Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood. I mentioned this in my like autumn cozy reading video. I read this basically every year because a lot of the events happen in autumn, and it's one of those things where it's weird, and it's very, very clearly like a stylized version of explaining events, but I love it. And I think at this point it's partially because I love his writing style and also just nostalgia at this point because I have had this book for quite a while. It is a very old book on my shelf. And yeah, it is one of my classics. I love it. Will probably always love it. So I read that one. So another classic that I love, well, I say classic, I don't know how classic it is. So something else that I read was Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider. So I've absolutely loved this series. I first read these, I basically borrowed my granddad's copies and read them and absolutely devoured them. And so I showed in a video last year that I had found these in a charity shop, like the set of all three. But I only read this one last year. And yeah, it wasn't just nostalgia talking, it is as good as that, as I remember. And yeah, it's just good old fantasy with sneakiness and a very interesting take on magic that I quite love. And I love Yelena as a character, and I love the other characters in here. And yeah, I will probably be reading the sequels this year. So a slightly different book next is Big Dreams and Daily Joys. So this is kind of sort of like a creative self-help book-ish. I found it very, very interesting, and I actually sat down and made notes on this because I struggle with sort of like conceptualizing ideas into real life. And the thing that they talk about in this book is basically, okay, if you have a dream, first of all, you have to make it into an achievable goal, because dreams are whimsical. Dreams are, like nocturnal and sort of like ephemeral, sort of like you can't reach them properly. But if you turn that into goals and then you break that goal down and all that kind of stuff, you might get somewhere. So it's like, oh, getting started and like finding pockets of time and stuff like that. But it's a very good book. And this is by Elise Blaha Kripe. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but because it's in cursive, unfortunately. But yeah, it's just that one. Next up is Malcolm Gaskill's The Ruin of All Witches. So I actually put a mini review of this on my Instagram because it's one of those books that it started off quite slow, and I was worried that it was going to be like that all the way through, just in terms of like hints of stuff going on, but then it started actually building up speed, and it's one of those where it's written almost like a horror / thriller, and it's almost worse because all the events happened, because this is a non-fiction book. This is actually like a story about a small town in America that went through their own version of like witch trials, and how a society can turn apart itself and almost attack itself, and individuals can attack themselves, like they can make themselves sick with fear and think, oh god, it's just anxiety, which is what we know today, but they're like, oh no, it must be the devil and all this kind of stuff. So it was very, very interesting, and yeah, absolutely love this book. A new read for me this year was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Now this is Dungeons and Dragons fantasy without all the stress and the battles and the fighting and the 10,000 characters that you forget the names of within 10 minutes. it's the story of an orc deciding she wants to stop fighting and open up a cafe instead. And it's so cozy, but yet so, obviously, it's fantasy, but believable, and just like it's not overly sweet or sort of like jarring or anything like that. And I love the characters and I love the cafe that they end up making, and it's just such a good cozy time. I would absolutely recommend. So next up is Eodan of the Gaels, King of the Scots by Keith Coleman. So this one was an interesting read because it's of someone that we kind of know a lot about, but we also kind of don't know anything about. And the way the book was written kind of reflected that, because it's unfortunately the problem of, because we don't know that much and we don't know what's true and what's fabrication, and we also don't have like a fully accurate timeline, and we don't know if this is so and so's son or his nephew or his grandson. It did get quite confusing at points, and I was struggling to figure out what we knew and what we didn't know. Definitely an interesting topic about an interesting time, but I did struggle to read it because it was going backwards and forwards between like truth and fantasy. Well, truth and not truth, I guess. Sort of like, oh, this could have happened, but this also could have happened. And we think this happened here, but it might have also happened here. And it just hurt my head a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. So next up we have Grimoires, A History of Magic Books by Owen Davies. So this is another reread for me. And it's such a fascinating book, and it's so interesting to think where all these sort of like occult books came from, and who they were used by, who piggybacked on who, and sort of like which names were given to these books to make them more interesting, and who we think might have actually written them. And it's all just very, very interesting, and because it goes through ancient and enlightenment, and sort of like crosses over to America, and then sort of like pulp fiction, and then like cult classics and like pop culture and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very interesting book, and I've read it a few times now just because it is so fascinating, and I love the way he writes it. So that's that one as well. So next up is The Bookseller of Florence. Vespasiano da Bisticci, and the manuscripts that elucidated the Renaissance, and that's how I discovered that I cannot read Italian. But this is basically a book about a guy who lived during the beginning of the Renaissance, and sort of like was so valued for his book finding, making, binding, selling, etc., that he became at least a national name almost, and he got to know so many influential people who were like book hunters and all this kind of stuff. And he was part of the whole rediscovering like ancient Greek and ancient Roman texts, like Aristotle and Plato and Cicero and all those people. And it's just so fascinating to read about him, and also about all the things he lived through, like all the different wars and religious like situations and sort of like artists and stuff like that. And it's just, yeah, it was a very, very good book. And then last on this is Dan Brown's origin. Now, I know that Dan Brown is a bit of a Marmite author, like some people love him, some people hate him, but I absolutely love the character Robert Langdon, and I love the sort of like humanities related quests that he goes on. Although this one's a bit more, and this one and Inferno as well, were a bit more scientific, but they were still using sort of like humanities references. And I just, yeah, it's partially nostalgia for the series, enjoyment of his writing style, and also like getting to experience all these places because it's a different place every time, and this one's in Barcelona, and it's getting to explore all these fantastic places and interesting topics and themes, while there also being a mystery to solve, and there also being that sort of like on the run kind of situation as well. So there's action to it as well. And yeah, I love Robert Langdon, man. He's one of my favorite literary heroes. Not gonna lie, which might maybe make me lame or whatever, but you like what you like. So, but yeah, they are all the books that I read in sum of 2022. So I thought I would show you some of the books that I'm kind of thinking about reading this year. So one I have already started, and then I have some that I kind of want to get going with this year as well. So I will start with the one that I am currently reading. So this is The Florentines from Dante to Galileo by Paul Strathen. So it's this one. And hilariously, I bought this one while I was reading the Bookseller of Florence because it was just so interesting a period of time that I don't really know anything about. So I thought I would grab that one, and so far it's going through them quite quickly, like the different people. But at the same time, I am learning a lot, so I will stick through it. So some of the ones that I want to read, like I could have put so many more on this pile, but I don't want this video to be 10,000 years long. So these are just like the core ones that I want to read at some point, and there will probably be more that will be on the what I read in 2023 list. But I mean, I hope so, because I haven't got many here. So two that I want to read, which follow on from one in this pile, is Magic Study and Fire Study, which are the sequels to this one. Because like I said, really enjoy the series, and now that I've established it's not just nostalgia, and it's not like, oh yeah, I loved this as a child, but I'm reading it back and oh god, it's really good, and I kind of know what is coming up, obviously, because I've read them before, but I am just looking forward to reading this. They're going to be a good time. And I'll actually do this fiction. So another one I hope to read is this one, The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, which actually won the Booker Prize last year, and which was kind of what made me interested. But it's also because I flicked through like the first couple of pages, and it seems to be in second person, so like you do this, you do that, which seemed so interesting. So I was like, okay, I want to read this. It seems so cool. And also the blurb, it's obviously an interesting story that I want to read about as well, even if it wasn't in second person. That's just another added fascination. So there's that one. And then a much smaller one is Carlo Rovelli's Helgoland, which is about sort of like the birthplace of quantum physics, which sounds right up my alley and really cool. And yeah, one of my interests. and it's interesting to see something from the beginning. So, and it's not too long of a book either, because it looks quite big, but that's just because it's hardback. The paperback is a lot smaller, so I think that should be an easy read as well. Not necessarily in topic, but at least in size. And another one is The Trials of Life by David Attenborough. So I've watched a lot of Attenborough through my life, as I think a lot of us have, but I've never actually read any of his books, which I think is just a crime. I think it's because I usually if I pick up a science book, I'm going to pick up a space book. So this is, though I am branching out into, I'm branching out a bit too much, some people would say, but I do have a few more sort of like natural science books on my shelf. And I just thought this would be an interesting, because this is his newest one, I think. And yeah, it's just a natural history of animal behaviour, which just sounded very fascinating. So I've got that one. And last up on books I want to read this year is The Road by Christopher Hadley, a story of Romans and ways to the past. It's history, it's Roman history in Britain, and it's also folklore and how these things have kind of like merged together over the years, and it just seems very, very interesting and very, very up my alley, and should be a very fascinating read. And yeah, as I haven't read it yet, that's all I have to say on it. But yeah, they are, just move these out of the way of the camera. These are the books that I have read and some of the books that I plan on reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it took me so long to make a new one after Christmas, but it's just kind of been quite hectic. Like I said, I've been working over the Christmas period, and we're still kind of sorting things out in the house and stuff as well. We also got a lot of games for Christmas, and so we've been kind of distracted with those. Look, my partner got Pokemon, and I have basically just been watching him play Pokemon the entire time. But it's a good time. Actually, considering this is only August to December, I read quite a lot. Like, that's a fair amount of books. Like, I know some people like read like, 50 a month or something, but I'm not that good, guys. I don't have the attention span for that. And also I get very, very indecisive about whether I want to read something, what I want to read. I pick stuff up and put it down quite a lot. But anyway, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know if you've got any books that you really enjoyed last year, or if you've got any books you want to read this year. And subscribe, because I will be putting out more videos in the future. Some of them will possibly be reviews of some of the books I've read. I do kind of want to branch out into that. I'm always it's always a bit nerve-wracking to do that kind of thing, because obviously some people get very angry if you disagree with them, and sort of like, oh, this thing is perfect, what do you mean you didn't think it was perfect? Or, what do you mean, you liked it, I thought it was trash. Which is why I was like, I literally thought about not putting the Dan Brown book in this video, because I was like, I know some people absolutely hate him with a passion, but at the same time, like, I enjoy those books. To be fair, I haven't read his non-Robert Langdon ones, so I don't know if they're absolute garbage or whatever, but I really like Robert Langdon as a character, so. But yeah, I will see you next time. Bye bye.